We're all thrilled to be here with you today. My name is Kelvyn Cullimore. I'm the President and CEO of BioUtah. BioUtah is the state trade association for life science companies. We work with companies that manufacture medical devices, therapeutics, diagnostics, and we kind of are a voice for the industry. And see if I can keep from turning that off. We're a voice for the industry, and we work very closely with our partner organization, BioHive. You'll hear from Kelvyn a little bit later. And most of you may not be aware that Utah is home to arguably, I say arguably because it depends on which study you look at, the fastest growing life science community in the country. We have been that since 2012. So life sciences is a big part of the Utah economy, and we're very proud of that fact. And while we are very heavy on medical devices right now, our fastest growing segments are more in the therapeutics and diagnostic space. So we're seeing a wide diversity of companies. My background personally, I was a founder of a company named Dynatronics, a publicly traded medical device company here in Utah that manufactured physical therapy equipment. And I ran that company for about 25 years. If any of you have lived here very long, I have people say, gee, you look familiar, and I say, where do you live? They say, Cottonwood Heights. They say, well, I was your mayor for 13 years. So we try and make that connection, and served on the board of the Medical Device Manufacturers Association for about 15 years. So very, very committed to life sciences and policy and things of that nature. Was involved in not only starting a medical device company, but also a city. So I'm one of the only entrepreneurs, I think, that can claim that I started a company and a city. And that's kind of a unique perspective. We're not going to talk about politics or cities today. We're only going to talk about entrepreneurism. So with that, I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So Lisa, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Lisa Dudley, and I'm currently an executive in residence, which means I'm an advisor in advisory capacity at the University of Utah Pivot Center. I help with entrepreneurs in preparing their pitches and making introductions and facilitating introductions to potential investors. Prior to that, I've spent half my career as a venture capitalist investing in life science technologies, and then the other half of my career I spent on the operational side in a variety of roles in life sciences companies, including the CEO of a startup company from formation on through early commercialization. Jerry?
I'm Jared Bauer. I have been in the life science industry for the better part of the last decade. Founded a company called Xero Medical in 2012. We had a great exit in 2016. But since 2014, have spent my time in diagnostics. I'm currently the CEO of IONIQ Sciences, as well as the CEO of Seek Labs.
See, does this work? Yes. My name is Myles Greenberg. I'm here, I guess, on behalf of the third career that I'm now in, which is as an entrepreneur. Hopefully this one will go well enough that I won't have career number 4. I'm a CEO actually of 2 local medical device companies, Alucent Biomedical. Alucent Biomedical.
That goes in and out.
Hello. Hello.
Well, look at you go. Give me one back.
Which is in the vascular medicine arena, and another company that we just started called Focus Therapeutics, which is an electrophysiology device company. Previous to that, I spent about the last 7 or 8 years. Is this off again?
Yeah.
Use that.
Just share that.
Yeah, let's just share that. I spent about the last 7 or 8 years on the company side of things as an entrepreneur. Before that, I spent about 15 years as an early stage VC, investing in a variety of healthcare services, biotech, and medical device companies. And before that, I was an emergency physician, practicing in an academic setting and doing some hospital administration, the pain of suffering of which led me to business school and the rest of my career. Libble.
Hi,
My name is Libble Ginster. So I am the CEO of Fluidx Medical right now. We have an innovative embolic device. I've been in this role for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, a lot of larger company experience. So maybe those of you who have larger company experience and are maybe looking to take the jump to a smaller company, I can definitely share some of my experiences. I spent about a little over a decade at C.R. Bard, Becton Dickinson here locally. Moved around, in a number of different functions, so marketing, product development, was part of business development, M&A, kind of looking at smaller, external technologies, led a business unit there. Prior to that, spent time in investment banking and strategy consulting, so, sort of on the outside perspective, looking in, evaluating different businesses. And then I have an engineering undergrad degree as well. So I feel like my role right now, I've kind of drawn on all of those experiences so I can talk about that as well.
Cool.
Great, thank you. My mic keeps going in and out as well. Can you hear me okay if I'm not worried about it? No, I think, can you hear me in the back? Caitlin, can you hear me okay? Okay? Okay. All right.
Just one other option.
All right, we'll try this one. This one, okay, we'll try this one. All right. Libble, I want to start with you based on your comments here. Having had some experience in other companies, Becton Dickinson you mentioned, and a few others, what really motivated you to pursue the entrepreneurial path instead of pursuing kind of the corporate ladder, going to work for one of the big companies we have? We have lots of big companies here in Utah that are in the medical device space and the therapeutic space. Why go the entrepreneurial route instead of just sticking with one of those big companies and climbing that corporate ladder?
Yeah, so I think first of all, the value and the training that you get from these larger companies is fantastic. And I had dabbled in smaller companies kind of earlier in my career, and I think, just understanding what motivates me, I love to kind of take ownership of things, really get into the details, feel like I'm kind of driving things forward and making a difference. And so for me, I ultimately knew that I wanted to be in a smaller company, in some capacity, right? And I saw my larger company experience as sort of gaining training and kind of knowledge that then I could, take to a smaller company. So.
I'm going to ask Jared that same question, because part of the reason I'm asking Jared is I know part of the answer is some people do it because they can't work with other people. So Jared, why don't you answer that?
Are you done? I'm done. Yeah. Look, I love startup life. I do. So I didn't actually come. I worked at Apple prior to switching industries and getting into life sciences, and I was involved in. I worked out of Idaho, but back and forth to their facilities in Cupertino, and I got to tell you, that wasn't for me. Just plain and simple, that lifestyle, that life, it's not for me. I wanted to get into the details, and I wanted to have a seat at the table, and I had a vision that I wanted to see through, and I felt like those were things I could do, and frankly, those are the things that actually excite me. Add to that I wanted to make a difference in some very specific areas, and all of a sudden the industry that we, the four of us are in, aligned with my core values and the principles that I want to be known for and that I want to live by. And so being able to work in the startup scene and to have a company of my own and to be able to build that from the ground up, everything from technology and products to the culture internally that's shared by the team, I'm able to have a hand in and influence in. And it's being able to be a part of that in a very tangible, very real way, for better and unfortunately sometimes for worse. But that's what I like. That's what excites me. That's what causes me to want to get up in the morning and actually dive into work every single day. And you have to have that as an entrepreneur. If that doesn't excite you, you shouldn't do it. Because no one else is forcing you to get out of bed and get to work every single day. You have to be able to do that on your own. But for me, that aligns.
So Myles, you have a unique situation. You spent years getting your medical degree.
4 daughters.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but You spent years getting a medical degree and actually practiced medicine and now have shifted gears. What has motivated you to do that?
Well, I guess I had similar frustrating experience to Jared's. So when I started my career, I thought I wanted to run a hospital. And so I went to work at that Israel Hospital in Boston back in, this was 1996. And I got this administrative role there as well, which is one of the reasons I went there. And then I discovered that what hospital administrators were largely doing in those days was firing nurses. And my wife's a nurse, so that didn't really go over too well. And I just, said, this is not what I want to do. On top of which, of course, in a big academic institution, sorry, Keith and Paul, it's a little difficult to get things done. You just don't have the kind of impact that you really want to have as an ER doctor, right? What was I used to? I was used to, okay, patient comes in, I better do something. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen, right? But when you're in a big company, it's a little harder, I think, to see the impact that you have on things. And so it took me a while, but I finally figured out that small companies are where I belong.
So Lisa, you have actually had experience as an investor and as a operator, and now helping entrepreneurs in your current role. What are you seeing as being kind of the characteristics that cause people to be entrepreneurs as opposed to going into work as part of a corporate entity? And for you, how did you decide to make that shift?
Sure. Well, somewhat to little, I started my career in large companies at United Technologies, Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, so some of the really big companies, GE as well, so had some really big company experience. And when you look back on that, there are massive resources available that you can accomplish a lot, but it's very slow going to make those accomplishments within a large organization like that. And on the entrepreneurial side, that allows you to move much more quickly. However, you have to be able to move much more quickly in a very scrappy way because you don't have those resources behind you. And so to be an entrepreneur and to have that mindset, you have to be able to understand how to do things, and you also can't have the attitude of, well, my title is this task is beneath me. There's no such thing as that in a small company. In a small company, whatever your executive title, sometimes you may need to grab the broom and sweep the floor, and any task in between that, as well as just attending board meetings and medical conferences and things like that. So I think it's really about being scrappy and having a mindset that, that you're not stuck in, you only do certain things. You just have to contribute at every level of your organization.
So what I'm hearing is some of your prior experiences informed your decision to become more entrepreneurial, but to be an entrepreneur has been something that drives each of you in a way that allows you to make a real difference, to be in control of the outcome, to pursue your dreams, so to speak, even if you have to be scrappy to do it. Okay? Well, you've all had experiences as an entrepreneur, so let's talk for a minute about what has been the most significant challenge in your entrepreneurial life and how did you address it? As you look back on your entrepreneurial experiences, what was the biggest challenge? What was the biggest eye-opener? What kind of set you back, and then how did you address it? Jared, you got the microphone, and Libble's got it. Libble raised your hand first, so go.
It's all you, Libble, then I'll take it.
All right, okay. So I would say, just think about this. There isn't one thing. So I think daily it's difficult. This is the most challenging thing I've ever done, maybe aside from raising my 2 children, as before. But but it is, but truly, I think there are challenges every day, right? In a big company, you may only deal with, if you're an engineer, you're dealing with a particular test that failed or you had trouble with. Here you're dealing with that side of the business, you're dealing with raising money, and so I think daily you have problems that you need to solve. And so I think that, so I would just say that I think on a daily basis, like I feel like I encounter many more challenges, infinitely more challenges than I did at a large company. So you need to be aware that that's what you're going to deal with, but at the same time, like, you're overcoming these challenges to the best of your ability, and it is really rewarding, right? It's like, I solved this, like, or I got my team to do this, right? So obviously, you're a team. And I wanted to build on to what Lisa said about Scrappy. I mean, truly, we were building desks the other week for our new employees. So it's like, you just do everything, and you have to want to do that. And I think the challenge here is you're high level and you're in the weeds, and you're constantly going back and forth, right? Like, okay, what's our timeline? What are we trying to do here? Okay, now how do we do it? And now come back up, are we all aligned? Are we doing the right things? So there's a lot going on, but it's pretty exciting. But back to Kelvyn's point, I don't think there was one challenge, but I think it's just a sum of many challenges, and just kind of working through, staying positive, and just solving things to the best of your ability as they come.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll agree with 100% of what Libble said, and I'll also add that we actually have in our, as part of our initial interview with people, we talk about everyone sweeps the floor, which is very much a reality of what it takes in startup life. The startup life is really difficult, and in no small part to some of the things Libble said. Maybe you're raising money 1 hour, and the next hour you're in a technical meeting, and the hour after that you're trying to hire someone. You are bouncing between tasks constantly. In addition, as the CEO or as the founder of these companies, you're expected to know things that, frankly, you already, like, I can guarantee that everyone in this room has a whole list of things that collectively even we don't know today, right, if we were to add all of us together. And so there's just gaps in what you're expected to know. Some of that was covered this morning. I love the conversation around options. These are things that a lot of people get wrong. But even finding advice to try and help you navigate the things that you don't know or that you may not yet have visibility to because they're not yet a problem for you, but they're coming down the pipe, is really difficult. And so you have to be really particular about who you put on your board and who you have surrounding you on your management team. And it has to be a mix. Because I've had this, I've had numerous issues where I bring in board members who look really great on paper, right? They've been in large companies, they have this massive resume, but they then are missing that startup kind of institutional, I've done a startup 5 times, 6 times, I know some of these things that need to be navigated, and it's a different layer of problems. And so you have to find a mix of advisors, and you need that. I was working with an entrepreneur recently, and they were working on the R&D tax credit. And this is really small, but the R&D tax credit for them, you can only use 5 years from your first revenue point for your R&D tax credit. But you can use this tax credit against payroll taxes. So for us in research, in technology research, early stage, this is really beneficial to us because it represents a substantial amount of money. But they had received advice from a board member that the money that they had received from investors, they needed to do everything they could to get the highest amount of interest on that money they could. And that blocked them out because they received revenue too early, and that counts as revenue on their taxes. And so that, whatever they made, a few $100s in interest, where it's like every penny counts, actually now is costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential tax credits that could be used against payroll taxes. And so there's these things that need to be navigated, and there's decisions that need to be made really early. And getting good advice for that is hard. So get a broad range of advisors, those who've been in startups, those who maybe have been more institutional or larger organization based, and you need to be hearing from both of them and really dissecting these issues and asking questions. What do I not know? Don't pretend you know. You don't. So ask what you don't know. What am I missing? What do I not see? What have you had to navigate?
Lisa, what about you?
What was the question again?
The question was, what's been the most significant challenge? I know Jerry kind of goes off on the guns. What are you talking about?
About R&D tax credit.
Yeah. What's been the most significant challenge in your entrepreneurial life and how'd you overcome?
I think one of the most difficult things for me on the entrepreneurial side, especially as CEO, is worrying about fundraising and being able to compensate your employees, right? Because these individuals on your team, they're relying on you. They're relying on you. They have families that they need to take care of. And when you're in a startup, sometimes the funding gets thin and it can be a challenge to raise financing at times. And sometimes it goes a little too long before the next round comes in. So personally, that's something that I worried about a lot and was probably the biggest challenge. The best thing that I can tell anyone to do, if you're going to be a senior management member in a startup company, you're going to deal with this and you're going to have to worry about it unless you're self-funding and you have unlimited pockets, is to really think about it early and start early and make sure that you raise the right amount of money and then some in order to reach significant milestones. Because when investors look at your company or your deal, they want to see that you've gotten to some meaningful milestone, and they want to know that the money that you're raising for your next round gets the company to a next meaningful milestone. And those aren't defined, hard and fast. There are a variety of milestones that you can come up with. They have to make sense. But I think it's to fund milestones, and you can never start the fundraising process too early.
Okay, Myles, we talked about daily challenges, we talked about getting good advice as being a challenge, we talked about fundraising. What would you add as a challenge that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, so I like to tell people that although we all sweep the floors, right, the CEO really only has 3 jobs, in my opinion, right? One is you keep the lights on. That's what you were just talking about. One is you get the right team around you. And the third is you make sure that the team on the ship are pointed in the right direction, right? That's basically it, okay? They're all equally important, but the thing that I've found has been a hard learning experience for me has been on the personnel front, on the people front. It's a truism that investors invest in people versus business plans, or what's the saying that HR will eat strategy for breakfast every day or something like that. But the hard thing for me to learn was when you made a hiring error and how to fix it. In a big company, you can sweep a lot of this stuff under the rug, right? If you have an underperforming employee, somebody's not really pulling their weight or whatever, it can get washed away and all the revenue that's coming in a big company. In a small company, it will kill you tomorrow, right? If you have the wrong person in the wrong position. And none of us, even the best people I've ever met at this, are 100% perfect at hiring decisions. In fact, I think if you're 50% right, you're probably doing pretty well. And so for me, the hard thing to recognize was how to quickly recognize, as soon as possible, that you've got the wrong person in the wrong position and do something about it.
And how did you address that when you found that was the wrong person? Because once you build relationships, especially in a small company, the personal relationships can kind of influence your decisions on when you terminate or when you don't. How did you deal with that?
Yes, to me, Jared, that sort of boils down to company culture, which we haven't talked about here. But if the company culture is a positive one, meaning that we're here because we're pursuing a set of goals that are critical goals because they are meaningful to patients or meaningful to whoever your constituency is, then I think people in the company all recognize that in order to accomplish those goals, you have to have certain things, and the most important thing you need are the right people to do the right job. And frankly, usually by the time they get around to replacing somebody, the rest of my team has already gotten there, right? They're like, okay, it's about time. Yeah. I'm usually the last one, to either know about it or more importantly, to be like, do we really have to,
Those are hard decisions.
Yeah.
One of the things I learned in my years of experience, and it took a long time to learn this, is that if people aren't performing, they know it. They know they're not performing. They know they're not measuring up, but they're scared to do anything because jobs are security. And the best thing you can do for somebody that's not performing is help them find a new opportunity where they can perform. And that's a hard transition for people to make sometimes. So, great. Those are great suggestions. Now, we've talked about some of the challenges that you have as entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I think is important is to identify the skill set that entrepreneurs should work to cultivate. So I'm going to ask each of you to tell me one skill that you think is really important for an entrepreneur to cultivate. How can you be a successful entrepreneur? And if you're going to be this skill, and there's lots of them, but which skill would you recommend for entrepreneurs to cultivate?
Preparation and organization.
Yeah.
Only one, I only get one.
You get one, choose one, and then pass it to Myles. He can do this. And then,
Okay, let me think. All right, okay. I'm gonna do 1.5. Positive attitude, because you're gonna have to look at things objectively. I think I talked about this and then part of that is problem solving, right? So you're gonna have, everyone on the team, you're gonna encounter challenges. My team, we're lean and we're very efficient, but I think problem solving is key. Okay, you hit this problem, like how are you going to solve it? And I rely on them, right? I mean, Myles talked about the team, and I try to bring in people who are much smarter than me, right? And they're very skilled in their area. So if you have a problem, you recommend to me how to fix it, and then let's talk about it. Does that make sense? And let's move on. But I think that's critical, and that's critical of everybody that you have in a small company, that they think that way. So, there you go.
Yeah, I actually wasn't kidding. Preparation and organization, I think, is the number one skill. And sometimes I talk about it as due diligence, putting my old investor hat on, because one of you guys talked about this before. You're often in front of the room talking to either your own employees, investors, potential investors, board members, and convincing them, right, that you know how to run this company, right? You know how to solve this problem, you know how to develop this product, you know how to deliver this service, what have you. And you will always be surprised by a question, but the most important thing is to know enough that you can answer the question, right? And if you haven't done your homework, you're not going to know enough, right? And somebody's going to be disappointed in you, and hopefully it's not at a critical time. So doing your due diligence on the market so that you really understand that, on everything that's going on in your own company, how you're going to develop a product, the regulatory issues that you're going to encounter, the reimbursement issues that you're going to encounter, the strengths and weaknesses of your intellectual property, right? All the stuff that every investor is going to pick apart, every strategic partner is going to pick apart. If you have a good board, they're going to pick it apart, right? That's to me the most important thing.
So let me dive into that just a little bit more. So let's say, because I've been through what you're talking about, they expect you to know everything, but you don't. And when I was mayor, I always had this policy I lived by. If you didn't know the answer, make it up, right? So
Wrong answer.
Wrong. That works in politics, not so much in fundraising. So when you are the technical guy and you don't understand finances, or you're the finance guy and you don't understand the technical side, how do you educate yourself? And is it okay in those situations to bring along somebody who you can defer to in a meeting? Say, that's a good question. I've got so-and-so here. I'm going to have them answer that because they know it better than me. How do you balance that?
Well, of course it's fine to bring people along with you. That's not an issue. But I actually think there's no excuse as a CEO for not understanding the basic level of everything that's going on in your company. I'm a doctor, but what do I know about finance or engineering or whatever, right? I mean, but I better understand the basics of it, right? Investors will understand that. Board members will understand it. If you can explain it in basic terms, and then if there's a really technical question, say, hey, well, Libble's my engineer here. She really understands this. She can give you a more detailed answer. That's fine. But don't not try to understand it.
Right.
And if there is not an answer to a question, or the answer is controversial or debatable, then just say that. People want honesty and transparency, especially investors and board members.
Okay.
I'll add just one thing to what Myles was saying, what you were talking about. As the CEO, I think that it's your job, particularly if it's a board member or an advisor or a potential acquirer that's asking the question, for you as the CEO to understand why they're asking that question. Is it because they just want to drill down on a technical detail and want to understand that? Or is it directly related to something that is much bigger in the picture? And so be able to make that judgment call, as particularly in the CEO role, to really understand the nature of the question, to be able to either answer it effectively yourself or defer it to one of your team members that can give maybe some really detail.
Right. Hey, Jared?
Do you want this to keep going, the same question?
Yeah, I'd like to know one skill. Tell me a skill that you think is important.
Yeah, I'm glad you changed the question, because originally you said the most important, and some of these things have been ticked off, right?
Yeah.
So I would just to say to Myles really quick, the CEO, your job is to have your fingers in and to understand all of the areas of your business. That's the job. So you're required to be a jack of all trades. And what's the saying? Jack of all trades is the master of none, but still always better than the master of one, I think is how that goes. And that is, in fact, the job of the CEO. And so you better be that. And if you're not that, if there's a portion of your business you don't understand, you need to go to those who are working on that portion of your business or get advisors in that area of business and figure out how to understand it. That's the job. Past that, though, I would say that there's a couple of things that any entrepreneur or any CEO of a young company has or needs to cultivate as skills of their own. One is you probably already have a vision, or you would not have created whatever it is you're creating. You have a vision that exists for the business that you're creating, and that's great. That's an important piece, and it is the first piece. But being able to message that, being able to share the story, that is the other half of that coin. It's the other side of that coin, and it's critical. You have to be able to message that to shareholders. You have to be able to message that to investors. I should have done that in the reverse order. But you also have to be messaging that consistently to your team. Libble talked about, are we still aligned? Well, that's messaging, right? Okay, hey, we got down into this nitty-gritty. We jumped into this problem for a period of time. Now we're going to pop back up. Let's go back to vision. Let's make sure that we're still on the same page. And messaging that and having the ability to do that is something that has to be practiced. It's cultivated. Very few people are born with that. You spend some time in the mirror, you give yourself speeches as you're driving to and from work, but messaging is critical.
Can I build on what you just said?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important, and I think something that I did not appreciate enough is that if you are the CEO or you are the leader, you are a salesperson. Like in a good way, right? You are selling your messaging to your team. You're building alignment. You're making sure that the important things are being prioritized correctly. You are messaging to the board, to investors, and all of the messages are different too, which is important, right? So it's not sort of your one pitch. The pitch is different, and you need to understand sort of how to pitch that and when to bring in experts. And I think that, so there's a lot of that. I did not appreciate that, right? I was like, we're gonna come in here, we're gonna build this, we're just gonna get it done. But in order to get it done, as the leader of the ship, you are kind of motivating the team, and you're essentially selling what you're doing to a number of different stakeholders, and you need to understand what motivates them, how you need to message your product to them. So, yeah.
Lisa, anything else you'd like to add?
Sure.
Can I add one to the list, you guys? I know you're going back and forth on all that, and it's great. It's perfect because you're all aligned on this thing. With some experiences that I've had in the last couple of years, I would say I'm an old guy. My board makes me look like I'm a young guy. These guys are old dudes, but they've been doing this for 100 years, right? I think the most important thing I found as an important point would be inspire confidence. I think you need to inspire confidence in two directions. To your board, who looks at you as kind of like maybe a junior, and to the people that work for you.
So I think that's exactly right, and I think that goes to that same kind of messaging conversation. That has to be a part of the message. You can't go into a startup assuming that you're going to fail. All of the decisions that you make, going back to the discussion before this panel about options, you have to treat your company as though it's going to succeed from day one, or you will not succeed. And Libble mentioned something in terms of messaging, and you're kind of touching on that same element, but it is a different message to different people, right? So I may be talking about the vibrancy and the culture of a company in an employee interview where I'm essentially recruiting someone. It's half interview, half recruiting these days. I may then turn right around and be sharing the same story of our business, but I'm going to emphasize the money they're going to make to the investor. I may be giving that same message to the board about, hey, look, here's where we are, and here's some of the issues are, but here's our strategy, and this is why, because we just hired this person, this is why we believe we can get through. And all of this collectively then turns back around to that same person I'm recruiting in the beginning and saying, hey, we're going to make it, we're in this together, please join us. And that is a constant circle, and it doesn't end. At least it's never ended for me. I haven't found an end to any of that. It's constant, and it is sharing that message. It is assuming success and then fighting for that success, and that instilling of confidence, making sure that that's consistent, it's critical. That's a really good point.
The only thing I would add, I think these are all excellent and really important skills that an entrepreneur has to have. Perhaps one more, which is maybe a 1.5, because I think that they're so interrelated, although they might seem a little bit opposite. I think that you have to have the right combination of having a thick skin, but also being able to take feedback and use it in a constructive way. And that can be a hard balance to strike, but you have to be able to do both of those, because sometimes you do need to have thick skin or you're just going to crumble, but you can't just glaze over and ignore everything. You really have to be able to take feedback and filter and appropriately incorporate feedback.
And that can be really challenging. That would make someone a really good politician too, if they could develop a thick skin, right? So, all right, I want to give a quick answer, or have some quick responses to a couple of questions. We want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions of our panel. So, funding is always a critical element in entrepreneurship. I mean, it's the lifeblood. You can have a great idea fails because you can't get funding. You have a great idea, it fails because you don't have good management, but funding ultimately becomes a critical element. So give us your short response on how should entrepreneurs approach funding, and based on your own experience. We've heard in past panels where people have said, you got to knock on 100 doors to find someone who shares your vision. You know, you can't get discouraged on one, being turned down once or twice, but there's also non-dilutive sources, there's other kinds of funding opportunities. Talk to us a little bit about the process of raising money and the priority of raising money. Lisa, let's start with you. You're a past venture capitalist, so you can help us a little bit with that.
Sure. As a venture capitalist, the best thing that you can do as an entrepreneur trying to raise money from a venture capitalist or from any investor, even an angel investor, is to put yourself in their shoes. Ultimately, what they want to know, if this is not philanthropy, but this is a for-profit investment, they want to know how they're going to get a return on investment. So start with the end in mind and work your way backwards to figure out what are the important components relevant to your technology and the market that your technology is in, on how your company eventually gets a return on investment, and then explain that in a very comprehensive, clear way as to how an investor that puts money in today is going to get a good return on investment. That may sound very simplistic, but that's really what you have to do, and if you think that way, it will help you put together the salient points and the relevant points and be able to tell your story in a way that is compelling to investors.
So, super fast answer. I'll take kind of a different angle at the same question than she did. And I'll just say be careful where you take money from. So be really cognizant of where the source of capital is. Money is not just money. Money comes with its own set of issues, and those issues are related to the expectations of that particular investor. And that applies for both dilutive and non-dilutive funding as well. So non-dilutive funding sounds great in principle, and everybody loves to talk about it, and oh my gosh, I got this grant, and it didn't dilute my cap table. Okay, but did it create a massive distraction for your business that has you going a completely different direction than the direction that your business actually needs to go to long-term to succeed, right? This is a question. It needs to align, or I would say that its value is diminished, and sometimes it maybe even has a negative impact on the business as a whole. And I've been a part of those decisions where it did in fact have a negative impact. In terms of a retail investor, your next door neighbor, a high net worth individual, they may be coming in and they may be coming in at a valuation that they love and that you love, but they don't have those relationships to the venture community that you're going to need for your Series B and your Series C. And so now you go to your Series B, they've never heard of you before, you potentially have a down round off of the valuation that your neighbor gave you, and you're in a tough position again because you now have an angry investor, and you're almost starting from scratch in terms of those relationships. So be really careful. Think through where you're getting money from. At the end of the day, if you're going broke, money might be money. But if you have any sort of time, if you start with this in mind, if you start with the strategy, really think through where your capital is coming from and make sure you're getting it from the right place where the expectations are aligned with actually what can be accomplished by your company.
Yes and yes. Preparation and organization is the key. I spend months in advance of a fundraising round honing my pitch, honing my prospective investor list, and making sure I understand who to go to and what story to tell. In my view, your rate of success is much higher if you do that.
So when you say you took time to decide who you're going to go to, it's important because not all investors are created equal. So if you've got a medical device, you don't want to go present to a bunch of people whose portfolio is primarily therapeutics. So how do you find those people?
There's an awful lot of public information out there, especially when you're dealing with venture capital investors and strategic investors. I look at the firm, I look at their portfolio, I look at the individual partners and what they invest in. I know from the competitive arena, other technologies out there, who else has shown an interest in those sorts of things. You've got to understand your audience. This is as important as developing the right pitch for the right audience. And also other stuff like the kind of fund to invest, right? Are they at the end of their fund, the beginning of their fund? What's their check size typically? Does it match up with where you are? If you're raising a Series A and somebody only does growth equity, well, that's probably not the right investor for you, right? I mean, there's a lot of facets to this. So I recommend having a very big Excel spreadsheet and a lot of features on there that hopefully match up with what we're looking for.
Good advice.
Okay. All right. I was thinking as you all were talking. These are great points. I think, yeah, number one, I think keep your options open, right? I think explore all your options. Have a lot of discussions with people. So this goes into, I guess, like one of the key things. When I think about being successful and what I've done is to really continue to network and grow your list of advisors, right? They're going to help you across the board. That's everybody. That's clinical advisors, physicians. That's like other people who are running businesses, locally, other places. Those are investors in this space. And so just networking. It's so basic, but it's helped me across my business completely, right? From hiring to getting third-party help in certain areas, to fundraising in particular. So I think that building your network is critical. Having as many discussions as you can will continue to understand the trade-offs in terms of like the different mechanisms you can use to fund and the different groups you can go to. For example, if you're raising a few $1 million, like you may not need to go to an institutional investor. It may not be a good idea at the time. They would probably want a much larger raise depending on the fund and where they focus. And so I think understanding all of that, doing a ton of research, creating lists. I think something I still struggle with is as you move through the process, you kind of want all of your groups you're talking to sort of along at the same point in the process, right? You don't want a few groups way out in front of their due diligence and others you're just starting to talk to because you'd like to kind of explore your options and make it kind of potentially a competitive situation. So, and that all speaks to preparation and organization. So I think that's really important. In our business, I've raised multiple seed rounds. We're just closing our Series A. I think that you have a range of investors, so you can go to a number of different individuals, maybe through the network, through your board, through other advisors. Physician investors are an interesting group as well, if there are physicians in your space, because they can help you from an advisory standpoint as well as funding, depending on the extent of your funding needs. Explore, the institutional investors, the venture capital firms, if they're, again, in your space or, and appropriate in terms of where you are in your process. And then finally, strategic companies, right, in the space, they're starting to make investments as well. So a number of different areas to look at. And I think just exploring options and talking to people and understanding the trade-offs is really important.
Okay, before we go to the audience, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and answer this. You say yes or no just by raising your hand and answer this question. You're raising capital. You have an opportunity to raise more than you need. It will be a little bit more diluted, but you can raise more than you need. Raise your hand if you say yes, you do it. Okay. All right, Chandra, you had a question.
Yeah, so I have the joy of working with many entrepreneurs, and I also have the sadness of getting midnight calls saying, I talked to 50 investors and I don't have a term sheet. How many doors did you all knock on in your early days to get that first term sheet?
All right, let's give it, just respond with a number, and then we're going to go out and ask questions again. So, number, how many of you?
I don't know, a lot, but you have to, I feel like you should see where that's going and understand, and this is to Lisa's point, taking feedback, right? Because you're gonna see like a common thread. This isn't maybe gonna be totally shocking, like you're gonna see this playing out for a particular reason, and is there a way that you either change your approach, maybe modify your message, modify what you're doing, so, I don't know, a lot, yeah. And I feel like I'm always fundraising too, like I'm closing my Series A and I'm starting the next raise, sorry, can you hear me?
Doesn't stop.
Yeah, I know it doesn't stop, and I'm starting to say, okay, we're looking at our next raise, and I'm starting to have introductory discussions because the process takes a long time, so, yeah, it keeps going.
Myles, how many?
A lot.
To use a technical term, a shitload.
Okay. and that's approximately.
I would say probably have a spreadsheet that has, I don't know, 100 firms on it, something like that.
Yeah.
Now, let me modify that a little bit, just because, you know, as you learn about those firms that are on your initial list, whatever the number is, right, you're going to decide that maybe it's not worth the effort, right? Or maybe you're not, you're going to send them a pitch deck or executive summary or whatever, and when you don't hear back from them, you're not going to keep pursuing them because you don't really think they're a great fit anyway. Just one other point that I realized, I don't think any of us spoke to this, maybe this is completely obvious, but Lisa and I in particular have experience both as VCs and also working with the Pivot Center as executives and residents, as does Dave Noteware here in the front. And I think we've all seen our share of pitch decks that are, let's say, inadequate, to be charitable. A lot of the months I spend in preparation, I spend on that pitch deck, and I show it to a lot of people, right, before I get in front of the audience that actually needs to hear it. And I get a lot of feedback. And that's probably my number one recommendation, other than making your list of investors and checking it twice, right, is to come up with a pitch deck that's been iterated multiple times with people that should know something about whether it's any good or not.
Good advice. Jared, number?
I have no idea. It'd be way too painful to keep track of that. I don't know, lots. I want to just touch on two things really quick. First of all, Libble's right. You're always raising money, and I love that she pointed out that she's already having conversations about her Series B as she's getting ready to close her Series A. Most people aren't going to make an investment the week after they hear about you for the first time. It's just not the way they work. So building those relations over time is incredibly beneficial. One of my companies, we're having a lot more luck raising money today than we were a year ago, but it's the exact same people I was talking to a year ago. We continue to just execute on our strategy. They observed that. They were slightly interested then. They're very interested now. There's a gap between those two things, and it's nothing other than they had visibility to what we were doing. And then the next thing I would say is on the pitch deck, I agree 100% with Myles. Send this thing around. I will say though that I was working on a pitch deck late last year, and we sent it to multiple major banks, banks that we have pretty good relationships with. And they all came back, and actually we didn't do it all at once. We sent it to one, and then to another, and then to another, and to another, and kind of refined it as we were going through. And I've never sent a legal document to an attorney that didn't move a comma, ever. And I've never sent a legal document to an attorney where they didn't say this is really bad. even if someone else in their office created it. In fact, I sent it to one attorney who said that it was bad, and he wrote it like 2 years prior. So, and that's a true story. He's still my attorney. I really like him. I've also never sent a pitch deck to someone asking for opinion and them not telling me all the things that are wrong with it, even if someone else who's in an equally strong position just critiqued it to make that change happen. And so there's a balance there. And so go out, get it, but part of your job is to know how to balance the feedback that you're getting.
Well, just one other thing on that front, like I actually have multiple versions of my pitch deck.
So do I. Yeah.
So I would think to you.
And I would say too, I have this is kind of crazy. I have a slightly different pitch deck for every single group.
Yes.
So I go through it, I'm like, okay, I have a discussion with this group, okay, I have a discussion with this group. And I cater it completely to them, right? If I'm talking to an institutional investor and I know where they focus, I kind of cater to that. If I'm talking to a strategic and they, maybe they're more interested in a certain messaging or aspect of my product, then I kind of cater that one. So I think that makes it much more compelling. And then I cater my message to what I think they want to hear. To Lisa's point, I know where they're coming from, right? And you kind of get that the more you do this. So I think that's really important.
Some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla, right?
Yes to all that, 100%.
I don't have a specific number, but if as an entrepreneur you've had 50 conversations with potential investors who invest in your space and who have an active fund and are actively investing, you're doing something wrong if at least one of them isn't interested in doing due diligence. It may be the case that out of the 50, only 2 or 3 are actively investing and or invest in your particular space. So I would say that is potentially either an issue of not targeting and not really understanding the investors and the investor profiles well enough and doing that research, or not having an adequate pitch deck. Because if you have a great therapeutic in oncology and you are going to the top 10 funds that are actively investing in early stage oncology technologies and they don't have anything competitive in their portfolio, and they're not at least interested in continuing to have dialogue with you, there's something wrong with what you're pitching, the way you're pitching, or the content of your technology, and you need to take a hard look at that. That doesn't mean that at the end of the day you may not speak to hundreds of potential investors before you get a syndicate together, but if you're really talking to good quality firms that fit the criteria, you need to figure out what you're not doing right.
We have about 2 minutes left. If anyone has a burning question for one member of the panel, I'll entertain that. Right here.
Question for Myles, since you're the only one who mentioned good board, so what is your ideal board of director composition? Let's say you have 3 or 5 members without VC.
Well, small, I think, is a good idea, especially at an early stage. If it gets beyond about 6 or 7 people, it's pretty hard to make real decisions. So that's one thing. The most important members of your board for you as a CEO are going to be other CEOs, people who are experienced in doing what you've been doing it in a similar or related field, and can give you advice. The 2 people I call all the time on my board are the 2 guys that have each been CEO 5 or 6 times. They're older than me. But you're going to have some non-choice about it, right? If you have VCs involved, any institutional investor, they're going to put somebody on your board, and they're going to tell you what they think your board will look like as well.
Any other questions? Okay, well, we're going to tell our panelists, thank you very much for your perspectives. We could go on. I had 15 other questions here we could have talked about. One last thing, if your son or daughter were going into being an entrepreneur, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them? We've got 2 minutes to do it, so we'll make it quick. We'll start with Lisa. If your son or daughter are going to be an entrepreneur, what would you tell them?
Don't skimp on legal work. Don't skimp on a good IP attorney, and don't skimp on a good corporate attorney. Because don't skimp on attorneys. Don't skimp on a good IP attorney, and don't skimp on a good corporate attorney. I know entrepreneurs starting out don't want to spend the dollars on that, but those things are really important to get right early on.
Be careful who you partner with and persevere.
Get a real job? No, it's pretty much all the stuff we've been saying here, right? It's like, okay, make sure you understand what it is you're actually going after here. Really understand it before you do it.
Yeah, I think understanding the business need, unmet need, right, market need, work hard, you're gonna be scrappy, yeah.
So in other words, be patient, positive, and perseverant. Those are the keys to being.
Final letters on the wall.
All right,
Yep.
great. Thank you. Let's give our panelists